off on a tangent here. What do you think is a bigger part of the problem that we have with the bubble in housing right now? Was it the Bank of Canada holding interest rates too low for too long, or was it the federal and provincial governments not figuring out how to keep foreigners from buying houses they never intend to live in? Well, driving up the money and driving up the cost, as well as creating a sort of a black market money laundering situation. That's what I'm reading about. And I think there's a lot of unused housing purchased by people that are speculating on it or just hiding money. So which of those two things were the worst part of the problem, and how big of a part of that housing problem is that?
Tough to say. I mean, it's obviously everything you mentioned is driving up prices, right? I could go on. There's other factors too, right? There's a lot of different factors that are affecting it.
What are some of the bigger ones that you're talking about?
Well, the fact that we have fewer people living in households now. Population is growing,
so a cultural thing.
Part of it is that, right? Part of it is a cultural thing in the sense that we have fewer people living in a household. Part of it is a cultural thing where the demand for the upper end never yields because people see themselves as just getting a bigger and bigger and a bigger home. Now we have, people who are in a typical sort of income bracket or maybe a median income bracket who are living in really, really big $1 million homes. That upward pressure on the top end never stopped, partly for cultural reasons, because we like that, we want to do that. But no, it's all the things you mentioned too, right? There was a period where we were doing 40-year mortgages and super low interest rates, right? The housing market in that sense is more accessible to people, which is a good thing. So there's a bunch of stuff. The foreign buyer thing, I mean, we are a stable. The reason why we get so much investment for people investing in our real estate is because of the stability of our country. It's a safe bet. Canadian real estate, no matter where you are in the world, you see the same thing in like the UK and London. This is the place to be to buy. New York City, this is the place to be if you're a rich person, a billionaire in another country. If you want to get money out of the country, if you live in a less stable environment, rather than keep money in your own environment where, maybe it's going to be taken by corrupt politicians, maybe it's going to be taken by, thieves or whatever, criminal organizations. Maybe you're afraid the economy is going to collapse and that's going to lose its value. The safe bet for rich people in other countries has been real estate in stable economies. London, New York City, Canada, across Canada, Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, right? So it's partly a mark of our own success in a way that everyone can let more people for a period of time are able to afford first-time home buyers, and that we're such an attractive market for money laundering is a big one. But even if it isn't money laundering, right? You see in Russia the kleptocracy, right? This is state money that is stolen from the state that is used to given to individual rich people who are buying properties in other countries, and Canada is definitely part of that. So that has had a upward pressure on the price. There's a bunch of stuff. But all of it put together has created this market that needs a response from the government, a strong response. It's so bad today. When I was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I can't remember what it is now, now it's got 13 years or so, when I bought my home here in North Bay, my first home, the housing market was so bad then, I was basically priced out of anywhere. I was so lucky to be able to afford a home in North Bay when I did. That same home that I live in today, I tell people all the time, I don't think I could afford it in today's market with the same income that I have now. And I was complaining about the market 15 years ago about how insane it had gotten, how difficult it was to rent or buy a home. And it's only gotten worse, so much worse. And boom, 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 big jumps. So at what point are people going to be able to hit the alarm bell on this and say, maybe we're not doing enough. Maybe there are other options, including direct public investment in housing, that we need to entertain. We seem so reluctant to do that.
What type of housing should the taxpayer invest in to build up the low end of accessibility? What kind?
So the DSAB does that data, right? They say who's on the wait list for affordable housing and what are they looking for and what are their housing needs. Right. Above all, by far, the number one lack of supply is single bedroom or bachelor apartments. 1 bedroom or bachelors, above all. I mean, it's overwhelming. So you start there.
Anybody building those?
Nobody.
Yeah.
Or not nobody. Very few.
Yeah.
Very few. The demand is outpacing, and that's exactly the market forces, right? The demand is dramatically outpacing the supply.
Yeah. And before that, landlords had issues and were having problems
Sure.
renting out, right?
Okay, that's a
And
touchy
that-
subject for me too, but I'll speak on that.
Well, it's part of the problem.
Definitely,
right?
definitely.
People have tried to get into the landlord business, small entrepreneurs, buy an extra house, rent it
Save
out.
up their money, retire.
And,
yeah,
it
nothing
became
wrong with that.
a money pits because of issues they had with tenants and bureaucracy and whatnot.
So that's 100% a legit issue. It's something I've talked about a lot with local landlords, a lot. And invariably, this is what we get to at the end of the conversation, is that they do not want to be in the business of affordable housing for people who are living on the margins, who are struggling or vulnerable or whatever, unstable, whatever. They do not want to be
Social
in the
service
business.
dependent.
Or whatever. It's complicated, right? There's a lot of different stories that can make somebody's housing situation tenuous or
Yeah.
make their life unstable, right? There's a lot of different reasons. So it's hard to, there are a couple big ones, but it's hard to paint it all with the same brush.
There's a
But-
term for,
Difficult to house.
well, people that have multiple part-time jobs that are tenuous.
Sure,
I forget the
sure.
term.
It's like precarious workers. Yeah?
Yeah.
Definitely that too. But I mean, in most cases, it's not the precarious workers that it's the people who are struggling to hold down employment, or who are going through a mental health crisis, or who are having some personal issue, or who, whatever. There's a million different things. Addictions, obviously, and some combination of all of those things. But the point is, they've all told me the same thing. They do not want. What they want is to rent to somebody who's going to pay their rent, so that they can pay their mortgage or whatever, so that they can invest their money. That's how that private market is supposed to work. It isn't the market. It's not. They do not envision the market that they're in. They envision this market, and they end up in that market. That's the problem. That's why the other reason why this whole private-public housing conversation. Everyone's so afraid of public housing. Well, the private sector doesn't even want it. Nobody wants to invest in that, even with massive government incentives, billions of dollars. The Liberal Rapid Housing Initiative, which, quite frankly, is like an outrage. That's what it is. It's these subsidized developers to build affordable housing, and it hasn't done anything in this district, nor has all the other incentives. The DSAP did an expression of interest for all local developers. We want to put in millions of bucks. We want to put money in. We'll help you. Land, grants, direct investments. We want to grease the wheels on you developing something that fits the needs that we have. Single, affordable housing, rentals, etc., accessible housing, a couple of other things, senior housing. And we got a bunch. None of them were economically feasible, even with the millions of dollars that we were going to put in.
Okay.
Not one of them went. All of them were reliant on provincial and federal funding that we didn't get. Not that there wasn't any provincial or federal funding, there was, but not to build affordable housing for homeless shelters. Right? We're willing to spend this insane amount of money on homeless shelters, which is necessary, but at an incredibly high price tag to run homeless shelters. And that's the upstream thing that you're alluding to, right? They invest what the society gets as a value, as an output of the upstream dollar investment is so much more valuable than the downstream investment. It's so much more expensive here, and the value that we get for it is a homeless shelter that doesn't stabilize anybody's life. It keeps people alive, which is great, and it's a necessary thing. But very few people goes from emergency low barrier shelter to stable housing. That is a rare story. It's not an impossible story, but there are 2 or 3 steps usually in between long-term stable housing and coming off the streets in a low barrier shelter. Yeah. So we will spend the money here, but we won't spend any of the money here.
I did a rough calculation the other day, and my numbers might not be right, but it costs more to house a person on the marginal areas, homeless or whatnot. It's about 4 times what it costs me to live.
I have absolutely no
Like almost
doubt about that.
$10,000 a month or something like that.
No, and think about, and that's one way of looking at it, which I agree with, and I think is probably accurate, or if not, maybe more, or whatever. It's a shocking amount that it costs to put somebody through ambulances, emergency rooms, police, criminal justice system in general, the housing system, the other social services that are needed. I mean, it's 14 different agencies that person is going to go to, that has 14 different executive directors, that has, whatever. He's going to see the person is going to see 100 different workers. And the margin of victory or the whatever victory ratio is not good.
Once they get there.
Well, where we're at now, we're missing huge gaps in what that person needs to get to where we want them to be or where they probably want to be. You know? There's huge gaps. So, we've already been through 14 different agencies and millions of dollars, and yet there's a rung of the ladder that's missing, and you're falling back down. Now we do it again. I mean,
and more.
It comes
and more
down a little bit to the meritocracy thing that was in your piece. You know, I read your piece last week. It's really good. It got me thinking about lots of stuff. I love that kind of stuff. Glad that you put it out there. But I think one of the big hindrances that we had to addressing this issue, and we're agreeing that the cost of addressing the upstream issue is so much cheaper. And then, you know, you said in your piece, it's about finding the most value or helping the most people we can, you know? So that's what we want, is we want our dollars to help the most people we can. And we agree that it's up here. And pretty much anybody who's looked at data, and the DSAB has people of all different political stripes that sit on it, and they all agree. And the staff of the DSAB all agree. It's verifiable, you know? It's verifiable.
Yeah.
Why don't we do it? Why don't we do it? Why do we keep spending millions and billions of dollars on shelters and police and emergency rooms and none on this? Why? I think part of it is because people get stuck in this political debate of handouts and meritocracy, you know? If you think about the world as being a meritocracy or aspiring to a meritocracy, I'm not sure which one you are, but you talked about that, you know? Certainly isn't one now, but even if we aspire to one, you're saying the people who have done well have earned it. And the people who are not doing well, it has both ways, right? We want people to work hard to get here. And the ones who do, we say, like the cut of his jib, he did it right. He was smart, he worked hard, or she, whatever, they did a good job. But that has a yin and a yang. That means the guy on the bottom is there because he didn't do it. Or the person at the bottom is there because, sorry, you made bad choices. You're not as good moral fiber as this person, obviously. You know, your character, not moral fiber, but like, you didn't win.
Oh,
you lost, you won.
100%, I hear you.
Yeah.
And we're on the same page.
But that stops people from seeing it, from stepping back from that. Because we all work hard and we say, I worked hard, I got what I deserved. And I think I did. And I know my parents did, you know.
But in 2022, I think enough people know that not everybody has the equity of opportunity.
Definitely.
And that's where most of the work has been done and should be done.
Definitely.
But I think we haven't bridged yet.
But that's the point, right? It's not, you talked about the balance.
Yeah.
I obviously agree, like I said before, the private sector is really good at dealing with almost everything. Better than government by far, by a wide margin. It's like a beast, the private market. You mentioned that in your piece too, right? I acknowledge that. I acknowledge that the government cannot hand everybody everything, give everyone a car and a fancy vacation and blah, blah, blah. I acknowledge that too. It's about balance, right? And it's, where are we today, right now? And we talked about earlier, if I lived in Soviet Russia, I would probably be a liberal, you know, free market promoter, right? Because the balance was totally skewed on the other side. But right now we have people who, how many people do you know who grew up in like a middle class upbringing and didn't have mental health or addiction problems, so take that off the table. How many of them in our society have ended up destitute or whatever, like in total dire straits in the gutter and the streets? To me, I know a lot of people in that, almost none. Almost none. And if they have, it's because of addiction and mental illness that was the driving force there. Yeah? And it's not because everyone who's born middle class or upper middle class or upper class is a better character or a harder worker, or it's obviously, you know, the chances of being in poverty if you're born in poverty is way, 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 way higher. So obviously our balance is not right. You know, take a look at the housing issue. We can talk philosophically about whether the public sector should be investing more or not, or whether the private sector is doing a good enough job. Well, take a look. Is it? It isn't. It clearly isn't. You know, we clearly have not balanced that one correctly. When people are struggling and people trying to raise their kids in our city, their kids are going to grow up in really stressful environments because their parents can't afford housing, no matter how hard they try. You know? And that's the case right now.
I wonder if we can look at it from, rather than a grand change that fixes things, look at the little pieces. Like, for example, what other costs impact someone's life in a big way where they can't participate in the housing market? Education costs.
Sure. Okay, that's a good point. I love that. I love that point. Okay, that's a really good point. Housing is so if we talk about what is affecting the cost of living, which elements of our spending, of our monthly budgets or yearly budgets, is really putting us down. And we talk about inflation at the grocery stores, and we talk about inflation at the gas station, and we talk about whatever cost of education. To me, there is one clear answer to that question, and it is housing. You know, my parents were able to buy a home on 1 year's salary, yeah, and paid it off. You know, now when I bought a home, it was 3 years' salary, yeah, maybe 4. Now you've got people making, let's say your household makes $100,000 a year between the earners in your household. You're lucky to get a house that's 5, 6, 7 years' salary on $100,000. You know, so that is a massive pressure on our budgets. It used to be, if you were spending 40% on housing, you're at the peak of your revenue, your monthly revenue. You shouldn't 30-40%. It shouldn't be more than that. Wow, come on now. People are spending $2,000 on mortgages, on rent, and they're not bringing in $10,000 a month. You know, so that is by far the biggest pressure on I think, in my experience across this district, talking to people everywhere, Mattawa, Timiskaming, the number one thing making it hard for people to live is housing. And then you add all the other stuff, and it just puts more and more and more and more pressure. I'm not saying those things aren't real. They are. I feel it too. You know, but if I had to go and buy my house today, whoo-wee, it would be real tough, real tough. If the price of bread went up an extra $1 for a loaf of bread, I could shoulder that, you know? If the cost of water went up a little bit, but we're talking housing is doubling and tripling and like getting totally out of reach fast. Way more than this 4% that we're worried about in inflation. 4%. I mean, if we counted housing costs as inflation, they do for rent, but they don't for home ownership. If we counted that, inflation would be out of sight. Like, it would be outrageous.
It's a smoke and mirrors stat right now. It doesn't really reflect what's really going on. Yeah.
So yes, there are other pressures, but by far housing is the top, in my view. Mm.
I wonder if you change the rules so that people who rent out single bachelor apartments in their houses, and I believe a lot of the townships are easing the restrictions for that and allowing for granny suites and
Definitely.
as well.
Definitely.
But I think what scares most people from renting is getting stuck with a tenant not paying, or getting stuck with somebody that's unlivable, and you're impossible to accommodate in a normal.
Yeah.
Regular lifestyle. I would call it a regular lifestyle.
Yeah.
Where you have somebody also either a senior or a youth in a house where you want to contain the extravagance and the wildness. Mm-hmm. That scares a lot of people away. They don't want to get stuck with a bad renter, and the rules are pretty stringent these days.
I agree with that. It's hard to get rid of somebody. I hear that a lot. So a couple things there. Incentivization for developers to build housing. You know, you mentioned granny suites and blah, blah, blah. Municipalities doing that. So that's one thing. Second thing is back to landlords, what's keeping them out of the market. Yeah? So the first part, one of the first meetings I had when I was elected to council, literally in the first few weeks, sat down with senior management, said, we have a community improvement plan. This is the vehicle which we use to incentivize whatever we want to incentivize. It's of the tool belt of a municipal government. The CIPs, the community improvement plans, that's where you can put a little extra where you want to put. You want an industry, do an industrial community improvement plan, give grants or whatever, incentivize in whatever ways that are within the legislation. I don't want to get that wrong, but use that vehicle as an incentivization. So I went to City Hall and I said, this is what I think we should do. We should have a housing part of our community improvement plan, right? And they said, well, not in our scope. Housing's not City Hall, that's a DSAB thing, yeah? And I said, okay, but I'm trying to push that issue. This is one of the tools that I have in my tool belt. I want to do that. You know, maybe we'll do, like, I don't direct you, I don't direct staff. It was just an initial conversation and feeling it out and finding out what the, orders are. And we can go to council and see what they think. This is something I think is important. And then after a period of conversation, it was like, I had to explain, I realize we can't put millions and millions and millions of dollars of property taxes into that. I realize that, okay? I realize we're not going to be building sky rises of affordable housing with the amount of money that we can use. I realize it's a small cherry on the top of a bigger pie. But we should be doing that, And then through those conversations, we got the housing community improvement plan. And it's good. It's good. Hundreds of thousands of dollars have been put into that to do exactly what you're talking about. Granny suites, particularly granny suites, what they call secondary suites, but yeah, that's what it is, a granny suite, and other kinds of things, but it isn't targeted towards affordable housing, because there wasn't the appetite for that. And I talked about that the whole time, we need to make sure, blah, blah, blah. And then in the end it was, well, at least it's going to grow the inventory. That will have some impact on the market, is that now we're adding some to the supply. Even though it's not targeted where we want it to be, it's going to add some, which should alleviate some pressure in the wider market, which is true. But that's a
theory. Yeah.
It's not a theory, it's just a tiny, tiny nudge.
Well, the problem with the theory is when you get into a bubble market like this and people in the middle of a pandemic are coming north, is that the additions to the stock are being taken by people with more money and driving the market higher.
That part was bound to happen here. Yeah. That part was expedited by
it was about time.
The COVID thing just put gasoline on that. But why else did I end up in North Bay? I'm not from here. I don't have any roots in North Bay. I ended up here because this was one of the last places to hit that big boom, right?
Yeah.
I mean, other reasons too. No family decision is that simple or whatever. It wasn't one factor. It was a bunch of different factors. But when I got here, coming from Ottawa, and having looked at the housing market, I was 30 years old at the time. I was like, man, this is doable. We can make this happen. And we did. And luckily we did when we did, because that wouldn't be possible now.
What year did you come here?
That was 2010?
Right.
I was in Korea 2009, 2010, came here in 2010, pretty sure, somewhere in there.
Right.
But, the housing market has changed. But even then, what had happened was the rental inventory was so low and the rental demand was so high because we have Canadore, we have Nipissing, we have higher than average low-income seniors, higher than average low-income people in general, right? So we had higher demand on rental for a city our size than is normal in a southern Ontario city. So we already had high rental prices. Where Lindsay and I rented, we could not find an apartment when we came here. We stayed at the Sands Hotel our first night, and I cut my hand. It was super shady even then, yeah? So derelict vacant buildings bylaw, thank you very much, and other initiatives, thank you to City Council for that. But anyways, Sands Hotel.
I was so surprised that they didn't have any tools to deal with that prior.
That was like the second conversation I had. I said, what is going on in our neighborhoods? We got derelict buildings everywhere. What? And they said, well, property standards, they don't really say that. They only talk about really is your roof caving in. And I said, so people are holding on to these properties for 20, 25 years and they're a blight in our downtown, our communities, all our neighborhoods?
Yeah.
I said, that is not right. And even when I got elected, we had a vacancy rebate. We were giving property taxes back to vacant buildings.
Wow.
We were incentivizing vacancy. So the first thing was to get rid of the vacancy rebate, and then now the derelict vacant building law. Thank you to City Council for that, and thank you to City staff for that.
Have you guys discussed increasing the taxes on vacant land and vacant buildings?
Well, that's essentially it's not a tax, right? Because the property taxes are based on value, right? You go through the mill rate or whatever, but it's essentially a tax. It's a disincentive. It's a bureaucratic, and there's nominal fees that go along with the administrative component of maintaining a vacant building. Now, today in North Bay is law, as of last few weeks, So you're going to see those buildings already are starting to come down. They knew it was coming. And also we did incentive. We said carrot and stick. This is the vacancy, the derelict buildings is a stick. But before we did the stick, we gave the carrot. We said, we'll reduce tipping fees on demolition. That was one of our CIPs or whatever. We'll give you the incentive to do the right thing. And then anyone who wants to take us up on that, go ahead. And then we're coming right back around with the stick now. You didn't take the incentive, so now it's going to cost you. So that was gold. That's one of the things I think is going to make a big difference in our city over the next 10, 20 years, long after I'm a city councillor. And I'll watch those buildings go down, and every time one of them goes down, I'll go. And every time it gets rebuilt with a shop or a housing or whatever, something that's providing some value to the community, I'll go. And it's not just that. I mean, it's litter too. They're way more likely to be burned. They're way more likely to have squatters living there, being injured, people being injured there. They're way more likely to be. They actually have a negative overall impact on the public. It's been demonstrated scientifically that vacant derelict buildings have a negative public health impact on your community, which I totally believe is true. Just anecdotally, just seeing. But anyways, aside, what were we talking about? We got totally off track there.
I lost it too. I was just trying to think.
So we're talking about the government incentives,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So we did the housing community improvement plan, but even if it was targeted at affordable housing, it's a tiny sliver of the tiniest pie. It's not the millions and billions of dollars that is going to make the change in that market. And then the second thing was landlords back in the market, right? They just don't want to be there, you know, to try to find ways. Nobody wants that. The market, what you're talking about is like the small time landlord, which is actually a tiny portion of the housing market, really. You know, we see them because we know them and they're members of our community. We talk to them, they call their city councilors, and you know them. And you might even be one of them, and many of us are one of them. The small time have a few units here and there. But most of the housing is owned by, you know, bigger corporations or housing companies or whatever, property management companies and that kind of, especially more and more, they're getting all gobbled up, right? And people are getting kicked out as they renovate them, which is a way to get rid of people that they don't want so they can get people that they do want, you know? So making the housing market with that dynamic of being able to pick and choose who actually gets housing is bound to end up with people at the bottom who don't have housing.
Is anybody building, like, say, a co-op for young families, like affordable housing units, but not the townhouse situations we've built before, where it's actually almost a contained community, so you can control the situation socially, culturally, whatnot, so that it is a healthy, progressive, positive place for a young family to start? Like, is there anybody?
So a couple things there. One, yes, like not exactly what you're describing, but that you know, you're kind of describing the concept of transitional housing.
Yeah.
Right. Somebody who's not in a stable situation.
A next level of that. Yeah.
And there's various levels on the transitional housing spectrum, right? You go shelter, then like even our own.
I would call this.
We have 3 stages in our own
starter housing.
Okay, so no, not necessarily as like detached units. I don't know if that exists. The DSAP does own buildings where they, you know, housing like that where they can put people for various situations. But no, I don't think there's any program exactly like that.
Like,
but
you know that Hope for Housing or the Hope group where they were buying a house, fixing it up, and then finding a suitable person that had some gainful employment and wanted to, you know, get into a home ownership program.
They have those, right? I lived in a CCOC.
But I was thinking of one.
But that's dicey though, right? Because then again, we're talking about meritocracy, right? And then we're talking about we want to create a program for people, but they have to meet certain parameters in order to access. They have to be like.
What's wrong with that?
Well, because you're going to have people who don't have housing, which is not good for you and me, which isn't good for any of us.
I know, but this is one part of the problem.
That part,
that's what I'm thinking.
And we do have that, right? And there are elements of that along the spectrum, and there's gaps there. We need to put more there. So yeah, it is important to have all of the rungs of the ladder, right? Like the Chippewa site, there is the low barrier shelter, which is now that there's one moving inside, which is transitional housing, but it's low barrier transitional housing. So now it's a little more long term. It's not just where you're staying for the night. It's like this is your spot. And you're involved in programming, but low intense programming at this stage. Actually, the biggest programming is in the middle, like where you're actually intervening, or not intervening, but like coaching and mentoring and actually trying to work on life skills and that kind of stuff. That's in the middle. So you go low barrier, no, nothing. Low barrier shelter is nothing. Just show up and you can stay here. There's no barrier. That's the point of it, right? Because otherwise some people wouldn't be able to access. Then, next level up, low barrier transitional housing. So now you're ready to move. You're still not stabilized, but you're ready to move into something that's getting you in the program kind of thing. But if we put too many things there, that is going to go back to the bottom. If you put too much barriers right away when somebody is not stable and someone's life is in total crisis, you're going to lose them. DSAB has a stats on all the people who take OW. They have a pie. Yeah. And they say, how many is life stable? How many? So anyways, next step after that is the biggest programming. That's when you really do life skills coaching. Now you're in a setting where you're in a group, doing group work, you have peer mentors, you have mental health workers, you have people helping you with budgeting, all that kind of stuff. And then the last stage of the Chippewa thing is the top floor, and it's basically independent living in a pod where your programming is now back to being almost nothing, but you're still in the program.
Okay, I'm going one step higher
than that.
Which is, it's just a bit of a bonfire vision of mine.
Yeah.
You know the co-op off of Peninsula? Premier. The co-op off of Premier, where they have one-floor houses. Actually, those are a little higher end than I'm thinking. But I'm thinking about 1,500 square foot homes, all together in a sort of a co-op street for young families. where the entry level is the home is built to not what you see with these 2,000, 2,500 square foot with a garage.
Right.
No, I'm talking about young family,
old-fashioned start
one
home.
kid, 2 kids,
Mm-hmm.
to get a little bit of a yard, not a townhouse situation though, but actual home ownership, but the lowest end, smallest type home, kind of like the homes a lot of one step higher than a tiny home, but for a family.
That's basically what I live in.
Yeah.
Right? I live in I think it's 1,700, it has 1 bathroom. It has, no finished basement, my yard in the front yard is 10 by 10.
Yeah, which street do you live on?
Ferguson.
Okay, all right.
Between 5th and 6th.
Got it.
So there's old red brick houses that were built 100 years ago for railroad workers. Yeah? Anyways, so you're kind of describing what my house is, 1 step above a tiny house.
We'll take that neighborhood, put it in a place where it's still on the bus lines, but out on the outskirts a little bit. It's contained so that it's away from too much of the downtown stuff. Kids.
See, that to me is like missing. Is like a distraction then, because then we're not actually looking. We're saying take the people away from where there is temptation to do bad things or whatever, to live a bad life.
Well, it's a place where you can start raising a young family that's safe and that has
everybody deserves
options
that. For sure.
Everybody does, but it's not available, right?
Right. So we're talking about making that available. People, absolutely, for sure, should be like. To me,
I think that would be an excellent pilot project.
I agree. I'd love to see that project. But the reason why we have public health care and the reason why Canadians defend that as like a hallmark of the foundation of our society, public schools, public education system, that's not going anywhere. That's deeply ingrained in the way we see ourselves, It's not because it's altruistic, not because we're happy to have given somebody a chance to get a hospital visit, right? Fundamentally, that's not why. It's because we know it's in our interest. We know that having people who are sick, who are out in the street, and not getting care, nobody wants to see that. Nobody feels like that's adding value to our society. We all feel like that's taken away from us, from our individual lives, if we see that, right? We know that people not being able to access public education, elementary school, high school, whatever, even college, university, we know we don't do that. We don't say, we're so glad to provide public care or public education for the people who can't afford it. That's not why we do it. We do it because we know it's in our interest, right? You said that in your piece too, right? The business owners don't understand that's an investment in public infrastructure, education and healthcare. That's an investment in all of our well-being, not just the well-being of the people who access it. Mm-hmm. I don't understand why we don't view basic housing in that light. And you're quick to point out, not a big yard, not a garage, you don't want them to be living in luxury as a handout. And you said in your piece, you don't want people to be given all their heart's desires. The whole handout, fear of the handout thing. That's a blinder that keeps us from saying poverty is holding people down. And that is holding all of us down, Basic housing is not a luxury. You're describing a young family trying to raise their kid in a stable environment. Why is it in any of our interest for that person to not be able to get housing? It isn't. It's not in the interest of business. It's not in the interest of the taxpayer. It's not in the interest of any ideology that you serve. It's not in the interest of that family. It's not in the interest of my family. We make less than $100,000 a year, yeah? If I want to improve my quality of life...
Preaching to the converted here.
Well, yes and no, right?
But I'm looking at
a
specific, doable piece of the puzzle, which is missing, right?
You're talking about keeping balance.
Well, no, I'm talking about a housing initiative that provides something that's close to what people are desiring, which is a place where they can call their own. They have just enough work and go get them and whatever you want to call it to start a family. Mm-hmm. But the odds aren't good the way it sits.
Well, nobody, like a socialist or somebody who's on the lefty in your piece, you said lefty, yeah? Nobody there is saying, give everybody a luxury home. Nobody is saying, give everybody a mansion with a pool or a 3-car garage. Nobody is saying that, right? What they're saying is, people deserve it's in everyone's interest if people can access basic affordable housing. And it's cheaper for all of us in the long run. It's not only cheaper, it adds more value. It's better for the greatest amount of people.
Mm-hmm.
Basic housing is important, where people are not getting it right now, and less and less people are able to afford basic housing. And that's the point. So when we talk about, a balance, I agree with that too. But it's clear that we need a massive change, reform on the housing file. It's not working.
Let me look at it this way, or let me rephrase. The proposals for affordable housing have fallen flat because they can't make a business case in the private sector without massive public money, right?
Well, they have massive public money. They still can't make a case in the private sector.
Why is that?
Because the return on investment.
Why is that?
Because the market conditions favor the other end of the market. Right?
Does it have anything to do with the
Supply
standards that are required to make public housing more expensive?
Well, it may, but that's not the factor that is pushing one way or the other. So the other Liberal thing that we didn't talk about in the Liberal plan was $4 billion, which 25% for Toronto, 25% for Montreal and Vancouver, 25% for all the other 100,000, 200,000 cities, suburbs, and everything else. At least $1 billion for basically the whole country, right? Which basically for us means nothing, right? So one of the other Liberal housing plans was, we'll give $4 billion across the country if municipalities can demonstrate that they've cut red tape. Yeah, so that's what you're talking about. Red tape? Yeah?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, standards. But that's provincial.
Property standards and lower the standards. That's really what's hindering the balance of the conversation of where the capital is going to go. If we just lower the red tape here, the market will change, and all of a sudden all the capital will go towards the affordable housing, and they'll build all the affordable housing. That's the argument. That seems really, really, really rich to me, because it's so far lopsided on the other side. All the money is going here.
Well, you can disincentive
when you can take a property this size, when you can take a property this size,
yeah,
build 2-story building on it, okay, and sell it for $1 million, okay, boom. That's the easiest thing in the world for someone who has capital to do. Why would I get into the business of something that's a 10-story thing?
Are we taxing the profit properly?
Well, maybe not. I mean, part of it is a revenue issue, for sure. Whenever you're talking about a spending issue, you're also talking about a revenue issue.
Yeah.
For sure. And it bugs me when people talk about deficit.
I know, but taxing high-end housing, because that's what attracts the private, because the profit, maybe it's not being taxed
all
properly.
those things are good. All those things are good. Yeah. You're talking about pushing the needle in the market in these little ways of incentivization, all those things are good. And we're doing a lot of those things already. There comes a time and a place in any given issue where you need to hit the button that says bold reform. The time for nudging it 1% here and there with incentives is gone, because it's decaying our society to such a level and such a rate that the actual lifestyle of the people is now affected across the board, right? So, the people eventually are going to say, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow.
Well, maybe this is
they're
a
eventually
situation
going to
that
say,
only Canada or college can solve.
Well, they got a lot going on. They got a lot. They got their hands in a lot of pies already, Canada. They're ambitious, Yeah. But the point is, at a certain point, we have to just talk about direct public investment. It's so funny how we're saying, well, if we tweak it this way, and we tweak it this way, and we do this, and we do that, it's just all avoid. Okay, great, do all those things. Now also build housing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we both know it's not just building them; it's the maintenance and operation.
Well, build and maintain affordable housing.
Yeah.
Somebody needs to do that.
Yeah.
And if it's nobody else, it's the government. Anyways, that's it. I've been through this. I've had so many conversations on the phone with residents saying, if we put tiny homes here and great. If we took empty buildings and great. If we did our first right of refusal and great. All those things are great. None of that is taking away any of the necessity to actually build housing. None of it. It may, over 30 years, all these little tweaks eventually start to push the other edge of the market. And that would be great. We don't have time for that. This is time for the button. This is not time to hedge the bet. We talk about the political spectrum as a circle, and we need to find our place in the middle. There are times where the actual bold move is the sensible, rational move, right? If the situation gets so bad, now marginal measures are too late and too slow. You sometimes need to hit the button on various issues, and we've seen that throughout Canada's history and the Western world's history and global history. Sometimes societies have to go, all right, we need to change what we're doing. And on the housing file, that's one of them. And on the climate file, that's another two. But anyways, and that probably involves a holistic change, but we can't be afraid of that. It ain't working, folks. Take a look out the door. Something's wrong.